cool sounds, Cantor. You're going to be creating some really cool sounds in just a moment. We'd like to invite everybody to open up your chat box and wish each other Shabbat Shalom if you've not yet done so. And hopefully everybody has a prayer book for tonight, our Siddur, which we're calling Shabbat at Home, Temple Sinai Connected. And we are all connected as in a healthy and safe way that we can. And so let's begin. Let us begin.
Wonderful. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's good to see you all. We're going to kick it off tonight with a nigun. So don't worry about the words and sing along with me. Yain la lai 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 lai, yain la lai 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 lai, yain la lai 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 lai, yain la lai 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 lai, yain la lai 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 lai, yain la lai 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 lai, yain la. We'll sing another welcoming song for Shabbat. Hine Matov. How wonderful it is for us all to be dwelling here together in this moment. Please join me. Hine Matov Unanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Unanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Umanayim 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 Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Yadadai Dadadadadadai Hine Matov Yadadai Dadadadadadai Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine Matov Umanayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad Hine גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Shabbat Shalom, dear friends. Shabbat Shalom. So great to be together tonight. It's always so great to be together with our beloved community. Tonight we come together to experience the joy, to experience the wholeness that is Shabbat. May we enjoy this time tonight to take in and experience all that's good, all that's holy around us and within us. In this sacred time and in the holiness of our homes, may we let go of the fears, the frustrations of this past week as best we can, as we just give ourselves this time to slow down, this time to reflect, this time to enter the peace and the joy of Shabbat. Tonight, we join with congregations around North America in what Reform Judaism calls Shabbat Tzedek, the Sabbath of justice, which occurs every year near the commemoration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. So tonight, we celebrate the life and work of Reverend Dr. King and the civil rights movement as we celebrate the peace and the joy of Shabbat. So let's now greet Shabbat in God's presence with joy, with love, with Lecha Dodi on page 5.
Lecha Dodi likrat kalai, yalalai, 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kalai, yalalai, 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 pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו תפארת ולתהילה. לכבוד דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לכבוד דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. You'll take this moment to rise, turn towards your doorway, and prepare to greet the Sabbath bride. בואי בשלום, עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה וצוחלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי כלה, בואי כלה, לכת דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה. לכת דודי לקראת כלה, יללי, 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 פני שבת נקבלה.
Thank you, Cantor. That was so wonderful. What a great way to embrace Shabbat. Well, another great way to embrace Shabbat is to bring in the light and the warmth and the joy of Shabbat. And we're so honored tonight to call upon our friends, Philip and Susan Hain. And Philip and Susan are our friends. And if they're not your friends yet, just give them time. You guess you haven't spent time with them. They are a wonderful couple here at Temple Sinai who do so much. Between the two of them, they do about 50% of everything that takes place at Temple Sinai.
Hardly, Rabbi.
Well, it's definitely a significant amount, Susan, Philip. So thank you so much for lighting the Shabbat candles tonight. We're on page 9, everybody. And when you all are ready, we'd be delighted.
We read and then light? I can't remember, Rabbi.
Yes, please. If you'll, a nice reading there on page 9, and then you'll light, and then Cantor will chant.
So Philip wants to show something first.
First, we want to explain what we've got here. So we've got 2 boring candles here that we're going to light. And then we've got 2 pretty ones that we are just for show and tell. And the story behind them is that they're from Sfat in Israel. But the added significance is it was a year ago this week. Today we were in Israel.
That's
So
right.
this is the 1-year anniversary of our trip. So that's why we wanted to have them present with us.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and happy anniversary. And I noticed too, they're significant because they are Susan's favorite color.
Yes,
thank
they're blending right into my shirt. So
And that was not a coincidence that we bought this color.
right.
Okay, now we'll do the read.
Thank you.
Light is the symbol of God's creative goodness, an outward sign of the inner spark God has placed within each of us.
Light is the symbol of wisdom, of knowledge, and of truth. It reminds us of our commitment to God's commandments.
Light is the symbol of warmth and unity. It binds us together with Jews in all lands who kindle the Sabbath lights as we do now.
In joy and peace, in sanctity, and in remembrance, may the Sabbath lights we now kindle continue to burn forth in our hearts and in our souls.
Amen.
They're not on camera, so
There, they're lit.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kinshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Cantor, and thank you again, Susan and Philip. We really appreciate it. And looking at Philip and Susan, and we imagine Andrew is close by or in your heart as we get ready for our family blessing. And yes, he's there. And so we now join with our family members who are in the house or who are in our hearts in another house as we join together in our Sabbath family blessing on the bottom of page 9.
May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His face upon you and grace you. May He lift His presence unto you and grant you peace. May God bless you and keep you. May she shine her face upon you and grace you. May she lift her presence unto you and grant you peace. And grant you peace.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Well, this Monday, of course, our country will celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. He was born on this very day, on January 15th, 1929. He would have been 92 years old today. The Shabbat, we too celebrate his inspiring and transformative work. And tonight we honor the role of the Jewish community in that historic sacred work as well. As you may know, and I will forever recount, as you may know, how the landmark civil rights legislation, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, were literally drafted in Reform Judaism's Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. That Religious Action Center was created under the spiritual leadership of Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath of blessed memory. As we prepare to recite the age-old Jewish affirmation, the Shema, listen to the words of Rabbi Eisendrath. He said, Judaism gave humankind its first civil rights program. It was expressed in the Shema, the watchword of the Jewish faith. Hear, O Israel, the eternal our God, the eternal is one. Rabbi Eisendrath continues, as God is one, humanity is one, for each is created equally in the image of God. In that spirit, we now pray the Jewish watchword, page 14, the Shema.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Well, after the V'ahavta in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, we encounter the V'ahavta. We are so honored and excited tonight to have our 7th grade religious school teacher, Dora Fine, lead us in the chanting of the V'ahavta. Shabbat Shalom, Dora.
Shabbat Shalom.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. So good to see you. Thanks for being with
Good to
us
see
tonight.
you too. Thank you for having me. All right. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha v'hayu hadevarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha beveitecha uvelechtecha v'derech uv'shachbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot beineinecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha Liman tizkiru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'item kedoshim lelohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'aretz Mitzrayim liot lachem lelohim Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Yashar Chochech, that was beautiful, Dora. Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. So 57 years ago, in August 1963, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Reverend Dr. King delivered an urgent call for freedom and justice, equality, and civil rights. It was one of the most powerful pleas for human dignity. In that historic speech, Dr. King invoked the ancient and immortal words of the Hebrew prophets Isaiah and Amos. Reciting Amos, Dr. King said, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Immortal words. As a people, we were birthed and nourished by the life-giving waters of freedom and justice and redemption. From the Red Sea to the hills of Judea, from the steps of Washington, D.C. to city upon city, country upon country, it is true that in the words of the poet, all we ever have, as Jewish people, all we ever have are redemption songs, songs of freedom.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות, ספר לב, נורא תהילות, ספר לב. Want you help to sing these songs of freedom? Is all I ever have. Redemption songs. Oh, Machutecha, Ra'uvanecha, Bokei Hayam, Bifnei Moshe. Want you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs, these songs of freedom. 'Cause all I ever have, redemption songs.
Thank you, Cantor Alyssa. Thank you so much for leading us in that. And thank you for sharing the melody and the words of Cantor Marley. It's one of my favorite Micha Mochas. So thank you so much. Well, so last week, the whole Jewish world entered the second book of the Torah in the reading of the weekly Torah cycle, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. There are so many great teachings in the book of Exodus, and we didn't talk about it last week as it began because we had other things to talk about last week. There was a lot going on, as I recall. And but this message of the book of Exodus is eternal. It inspired people like Dr. King. As you all know, Dr. King, many of his most memorable speeches, and he had so many, but so many of them referenced Jewish teachings, Jewish words, and our greatest prophet, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. And so let's take a look at some of these teachings that inspired not just the civil rights movement, but the abolitionist movement in this country, and that has inspired other liberation movements throughout the world. So I'm going to invite Jason to share with everybody what we like to call Torah gems. We like to take a look at the words of the weekly Torah portion and find the significance and the meaning for our own lives today based upon the words of Torah and also based upon interpretations and teachings of the Torah throughout Jewish history. And as you can see your screen, and hopefully if on your screen, if you make the screen make the window fill your screen. And if you're having a hard time seeing the text that Jason shared with you, you just pull on those two little white parallel lines to the right in the middle of the text, and you just pull to the right and it'll make it bigger. So hopefully everybody can see that. Now this is, I lay this out like a page of Talmud. So Exodus is in the middle, and then the teachings about Exodus are then, thank you, Jason, he's doing that with this cursor. The teachings are on the side, like a page of Talmud, like commentary is on a page of Talmud, and the main text of Talmud is in the middle. We do that with the Torah reading, and we find these gems. So for those of you who are keeping score of the weekly Torah portions, you will notice that these verses from Exodus are in last week's Torah portion, but they're so good I wanted to bring them this week, and they are certainly relevant for this week's Torah portion as well. We are at the beginning of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And so now also you will notice, if you look in the middle, I want to start with the text from Exodus chapter 3, then go to Exodus 1, then go to Exodus 5. So if you'll excuse me for taking a Pulp Fiction approach to the text and jumping around the story, but you'll see the method to my madness with the flow of ideas here. So let's begin in the book of Exodus. You recall God speaks to Moses after he has fled Egypt. So let me give you a little bit of background, and then I would like to call on people to read the teachings and interpretations around it. So if you think you might do that, get ready, and I'll call on you in a second. But just to give you the background of the story. So you recall Moses was a prince of Egypt, and they made a movie about that. Moses made a wonderful Disney. No, I was going to say Disney, but it wasn't Disney. It was Spielberg. It was
DreamWorks.
yes, DreamWorks. Thank you, Cantor. It was DreamWorks. So Prince of Egypt. He was indeed, Moses was indeed a prince of Egypt. He was raised in the Pharaoh's palace. However, he was Jewish, of course, and he discovered his Judaism. And when he discovered his Judaism, at a certain point, he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a fellow Hebrew, a fellow Israelite, and Moses was so incensed, and with such a sense of injustice, and Moses was driven by a sense of justice. He was so incensed by that injustice that he actually took that Egyptian taskmaster's life, and the prince of Egypt, who had just killed an Egyptian, had to flee for his life. So Moses was in exile. He was living the life in exile, by the way. He found a beautiful wife. He had kids. He was a shepherd. It was a very pastoral, peaceful life. And then God came calling to the former prince of Egypt with a mission. And so, Jason, let's put that back up. And this was part of that mission at Exodus 3, verse 5. God said to Moses in the burning bush, when God caught Moses' attention with the burning bush, God said, "Do not come closer, Moses. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. I am God, said, I am, God said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." By the way, that's where we get the formula for the Avot V'Imahot prayer. That formula is right there in Exodus. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And I'm picturing Charlton Heston doing that and doing like this. And he's in the movie of Cecil B. DeMille. I can't help reading this story without seeing Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner and Edward G. Robinson. I just can't help it. I was raised on that movie. So you can see I highlighted, remove your sandals from your feet. Why? Well, God says it's holy ground, but why else? So who would like to read that teaching based by Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim of Poland, who was a rabbi in Prague in the 16th and 17th century? Jason just highlighted that. Who would like to read? What does it mean to remove your sandals from your feet? I'm looking around the Zoom room. Any takers? Did anybody say? And thank you for putting the PDF in there as well, Jason, so people can have this at home. So any takers to read number 1? Don't be shy. Heather, did I see a hand go up? Great. Heather Halprin. Hi, Heather.
Hello. On Exodus 3.5, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you wonderfully.
On Exodus 3.5, only when one is barefoot can one feel the little stones underfoot. Moses was to lead his people in such a way that he could feel their smallest sorrows. Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim Lunchik.
Thank you, Heather. So
Beautiful.
what a beautiful teaching.
Mm.
So it says in the Torah, Moses, this is a holy place, so therefore you got to take your sandals off. But as Rabbi Shlomo Ephraim taught, there's a teaching here about leadership.
Mm.
There is a teaching about how we also, like Moses, are to live our lives, because we are all leaders in some way. We're leaders in our families. We're leaders in our community, at our workplace, in our schools, wherever we might be. So this is a lesson for Moses and for each one of us to lead people in such a way that we can feel even their smallest sorrows. We can't have a separation between us and the people in our lives. No separation. It literally needs to be almost skin to skin, metaphorically. Metaphorically, I shouldn't say literally, more metaphorically, it's skin to skin. So what this is talking about is empathy,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is empathy, to feel with. This is compassion, to suffer with. Literally the meaning of compassion, to suffer with. These are some of the qualities that Moses possessed that made him the greatest leader of our people. And I wonder what your thoughts are, and please use your chat box. I want to make this interactive. Please type in the chat box any comment about this quality of leadership, of empathy or compassion, or other qualities of leadership that you feel are essential in addition to empathy and compassion. And as you're typing that in, I just want to share sort of a distinction between empathy and compassion that's been made by, psychologists and other folks in the past past several years. So empathy is that feeling of, you're putting yourself in somebody's place and you're feeling what they're feeling. So if they're hurt, you feel pain. You feel that sorrow, like Moses felt by taking his shoe off and feeling the pebble, that pain. You feel that pain. Compassion is also feeling that pain, but a lot of folks today talk about compassion. There's another element to it. It's not just empathy. Empathy is necessary, but not sufficient. What you also need is a desire, a willingness, a motivation to alleviate their suffering, right? We can feel somebody's pain, but if we don't do anything to alleviate it, something's missing. That ability to feel somebody else's pain then is not being put into action to help alleviate that pain. So that's the distinction that folks make between empathy and compassion. Empathy is the feeling. Compassion is the feeling and the desire, the yearning, the motivation to try to help make that person's life better. So with that distinction, does anybody want to add anything in the chat box? Anything in the chat box to the need for compassion and leadership? And by the way, we all know
Compassion.
what it feels like to lately, for some, experience perhaps a lack of empathy and leadership in certain quarters of the world, and how that makes a leader not effective. Integrity, Jill Namairo said, is needed. Yes, integrity. There's a Jewish teaching that why is the ark behind me? But it's the ark that was in the tabernacle. It was the ark that was in the wilderness. It was overlaid with gold inside and out. And we're going to see that later in the book of Exodus, where God gives Moses the direction. Make an ark to put the 10 commandments in, the stone tablets, overlay it with gold inside and out. And the rabbis say, why should you have gold on the inside? Nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to open that ark. You remember what happened to those guys in the Raiders of the Lost Ark when they opened the ark. It didn't go well for them. So that ark was never meant to be opened once it was closed. So why did there have to be gold inside? Well, the teaching is to teach us that our inside has to match our outside. Our inside has to match our outside. That's integrity. So integrity is important. Vision and communication are important. Compassion requires action, not just desire. Insight is an important, wisdom is an important leadership quality. Empathy is especially important as you lead groups or teams, says Diana. During our current pandemic, it can lead to compassion to what others are going through. Absolutely. To be able to feel the people who have suffered from COVID, families that have suffered from COVID, to feel their pain and to want to help alleviate it. That is so necessary right now. So these are wonderful qualities of leadership. And I think the Jewish tradition would say, if the compassion's not there, you don't really have a leader. And stability to experience the empathy, compassion while being able to manage the necessary oversight of management with equanimity. Yeah, to be stable, to be grounded, to be centered, to not lose one's way or lose the values of leadership or the principles of leadership in the heat of the moment when there's conflict in particular. It takes stability as well. So these are all great qualities of leadership, all something that we can learn from. And Moses got into trouble, by the way, when he wasn't stable, when that anger of his got the best of him. That's when he was not an effective leader. And so, yes, absolutely. Stability, insight, compassion, all these qualities are so important. Let's go on now to the second teaching. And this is one of my favorites from one of my favorite biblical commentators and one of my favorite Jewish teachers, Rabbi Harold Kushner, 20th century rabbi and brilliant writer, brilliant rabbi, author, thinker. So now if we look in the middle of what Jason has put back up from the Torah, from last week's Torah portion, so now we're going back in time. So this is after Moses, this is before Moses got the call. This is right at the beginning at verse 15 of chapter 1. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, the other named Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So just a little background on this. You may recall, or you may not, this is important to know. Exodus begins with talking about Jacob's family and Joseph and that whole family of Israelites. And that's what Shemot means. These are the names of the children of Israel who were in Egypt. A Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph, Exodus says. A Pharaoh arose who knew not Joseph, did not appreciate what Joseph did for the land of Egypt and the whole region, how he saved the region from a famine. And it says in Exodus that Pharaoh saw that the Israelites were prolific, the numbers were increasing, and that Pharaoh feared. And it says in the text, in the Torah, the Pharaoh said, let us be shrewd and deal shrewdly with these Israelites, because they're getting so big in number that if our enemy rises up against us, the Israelites might join them and therefore betray us and join our enemies and defeat us. So it's because of fear that Pharaoh then commissioned or commanded one of the first genocides that's recorded, that all the Israelite boys be killed. And if not killed this way, drowned as well. So, but the midwives, and by the way, we're not sure Hebrew midwives, were they Jewish, the midwives, or were they Egyptian? The text isn't clear. This text makes it sound like they're Jewish, the translation, but the Hebrew is not clear. They may have been Egyptian midwives, they may have been Jewish midwives. But as at verse 17, fearing God, they did not obey Pharaoh's order to kill all the Israelite boys. So let's see what Rabbi Kushner has to say. This is a long one. So who is comfortable speaking for a while? All right, Maggie, thank you.
The phrase translated as fearing God, Yirat Elohim, is the closest the Torah comes to having a word for religion. The case of the midwives suggests that the essence of religion is not belief in the existence of God or in any other theological precept, but belief that certain things are wrong because God has built standards of moral behavior into the universe. The midwives were willing to risk punishment at the hands of Pharaoh rather than betray their allegiance to God. This is the first recorded case of civil disobedience, challenging government in the name of a higher authority.
Thank you, Maggie. The first case, recorded case of civil disobedience, challenging government in the name of a higher authority. Now, let's keep in mind, it wasn't a violent act of disobedience like we saw recently in this country. It was not violent. They just didn't follow through with the order. It was courageous nonetheless, and it was in the name of a higher authority, that authority being God, the source of life, or we could say a higher authority being the value of human life and the preservation of human life, which, as our tradition says, pikuach nefesh, to save a life, is perhaps the most important value that can override just about any other of the 613 mitzvot, save 3. So that higher authority may have been the value of human life. Okay, but nonviolent valuing human life. So I think what's amazing about what Rabbi Kushner observes is he's saying that the essence of Judaism is not belief in God. And there may be some of you on this, in our Zoom sanctuary tonight, you're like, yeah, I'm not sure about believing in God or not. I don't know. Maybe there's a God, maybe there isn't, or maybe you think there isn't a God. And in Judaism, in some ways, that's okay. It doesn't keep you from living a committed Jewish life. There were a number of very committed Jews who did not believe in God the way that we might interpret belief in God is, or they were atheist. And as Rabbi Kushner is saying, belief in God is not the be all to end all to Judaism. But what he is saying is necessary, is a recognition, a belief that certain things are wrong. Certain things are wrong. Slavery is wrong. Oppression is wrong. Child abuse is wrong. Animal abuse is wrong. We could name a number of things that we would say it's just wrong. And that's what Shifra and Pua said, and they followed through with their actions. This is wrong. We're not going to follow this inhumane, immoral command of the Pharaoh. And so now I want to do a quick plug for those of you who are wanting to have a belief in God or have questions about God and what is the Jewish concept. I'm doing a spirituality series next month. Susan, I'm looking at you. You see how I got the plug-in? And I'll just give you the title. It's called A God You Can Believe In. A God You Can Believe In, subtitled Your Personal Approach to the Divine. A God You Can Believe In, Your Personal Approach to the Divine. So we're going to look at Jewish God concepts. We're going to look at what you think about when you think of God. What do you imagine? What comes to your mind? What comes to your heart? And we're going to come up with, I hope, a God you can believe in, your personal approach to the divine. So let's go back now very quickly to what Rabbi Kushner is saying. And he's on very solid ground here in saying ethics, morality, doing the right thing, avoiding the wrong thing is the essence of Judaism. I'd like you to put in the chat box who said this. Well, I'll tell you who said it. And you give me the quote. Hillel said this. The great Jewish sage Hillel is saying what, in some ways, what Rabbi Kushner is saying. Yirat Elohim, fear of the divine, awe of the divine, reverence for the divine, ethics, morality. Does anybody know? What did Hillel say when a Roman came to him and said, teach me all of Judaism while I'm standing on one foot? or while you're standing on 1 foot, Hillel. What's hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. Thank you, Lori. Our religious school assistants got the teachings. What's hateful to you, do not do to another, your neighbor, to another person. That's the whole Torah, said Hillel. That's the whole Torah, not belief in God, not celebrating Shabbat, which is great that we're doing. It's wonderful when we do it. What's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary, said Hillel. Now go study. Hillel was said pretty much the same thing. My favorites, one of my favorite quotes of all time in Judaism, the prophet Micah. Does anybody know what did Micah say that is supporting what Rabbi Kushner is saying, what Shifra Pua did, what Hillel said? Who's got the Micah quote? Can somebody put that in the chat box? I see people typing. I see people looking. I see people Googling Micah. Right, Mike? I'll give you the beginning. It has been told you what is good and what God asks of you. Only this, and then fill in the blank. It has been told you what is good and what God asks of you. Only this. All right, nobody's got it? To do justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So God's in Micah, but the ethics comes first. To do justly, to love kindness and mercy, and to walk humbly. By the way, humbleness, that's another great attribute in a leader, right? To be humble, not to be arrogant. They say Moses was the humblest person on the earth. Sort of a strong statement to say, right? Not that Moses said it. Hey, I'm the most humblest person on the earth. That wouldn't be too humble, but the Torah can say that about Moses. Right, to do justly, thank you, Carolyn, to do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Ethics. Ethics are essential to Judaism. Belief in God is important, it's fantastic. It's not a full Jewish life without some type of wrestling with God. We're called God wrestlers. But what is necessary, what is foundational, is morality, goodness, avoiding harming others, as Hillel said, what's hateful to you to do anybody else, and to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. And we know that Dr. King did that, and he lived his life that way as well. He did justly, he loved mercy and kindness, he walked humbly with God. Let's go to number 3, speaking of Dr. King. All right, so I'll just very quickly. Number 5, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, so now we're back in time. Moses is back in the picture. His brother Aaron's his wingman. Moses and Pharaoh went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Eternal, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may celebrate a festival for me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Eternal, that I should heed him and let Israel go? Who is God that I should let him go? I don't know your God. I don't know the Eternal, nor will I let Israel go. So now we turn to the great Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel at number 3. And let me just give you a little bit of background. So Heschel is speaking at the Conference on Religion and Race in 1963, the National Conference on Religious and Race in Chicago, Cantor, your hometown. It was the first time he met Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So we have Heschel speaking. Dr. King is in the audience at this conference. And who would like to read what Rabbi Heschel said so eloquently? Any takers? This is shorter than the last one. Thank you, Tina. And thank you, Maggie, before.
At the first conference on religion and race, the main participants were Pharaoh and Moses. The outcome of that summit meeting has not come to an end. Pharaoh is not ready to capitulate. The Exodus began, but is far from having been completed. In fact, it was easier for the children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Negro to cross certain university campuses. Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason, the maximum of cruelty for a minimum of thinking.
Powerful. And just an aside, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke like 5 or 6 languages. He learned English, like, I don't know, in his 50s. I mean, he died relatively young in his early 60s. Well, maybe he was in his 40s. I'd have to do the math. But this wasn't a translation of the Polish. He learned English, and he learned English so well that, as you can see, he's like a prose poet of English. And read any of his books, one entitled The Sabbath. It's poetry in prose, not translated, written in his 5th or 6th language that he learned. So, sorry, lit major, writing major, as an aside. At the first conference on race and religion, so he's at this conference of race and religion in Chicago in '63, and he's saying, wait, the first one of these took place in Egypt, and it was Moses and Pharaoh. The Exodus began, but it is far from having been completed. It's easier for children of Israel. It was easier for children of Israel to cross the Red Sea than for a Black person to cross certain university campuses back in the 1960s. Racism is humankind's gravest threat to humankind. The maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason. The maximum of cruelty for minimum of thinking. So I want to focus on that last part of what he's saying. In addition to this metaphor that there have arisen, right, we say, many pharaohs, not just to destroy us, to oppress the Jewish people, that anybody who's a leader, who's a tyrant, who's an oppressor, who is abusive to people's rights, who disregards people's rights. In Judaism, we would use that metaphor. They are a pharaoh. And the question is, who is the Moses? Who's the liberator? Who's going to stand up? Now, that's one aspect to, I think, what Rabbi Heschel is saying. Another aspect of what he's saying is racism and bigotry and prejudice, he's saying, are based on hatred and cruelty. And it shows an absence of reason and thinking. So prejudice, bigotry, lack reason and lack thinking. And that makes sense on a big level, right? Most people who are prejudiced or bigoted or hateful, whether it's to Black people, Jewish people, people of color, people from another country, immigrants, whatever it might be, their thinking, we might say, is a bit distorted, right? Their thinking is incorrect. There's something, if we were to look at the premises of their arguments of why they're prejudiced, we could maybe look at that if they could articulate, and we would find there's something faulty in their reason. There's something faulty in their logic. You know, you could have a distorted belief that somebody is inferior to me because they have another religion or another skin color. That's faulty logic. Who says they're inferior to you because of their skin color, their religion, or their race, or anything like that? That's not reasonable. It's illogical on one level. Now, I want to suggest that in addition to what Rabbi Heschel said, it's not just a failure of thinking for people who are prejudiced or bigoted or discriminate. It's a failure of feeling. Back to compassion and empathy. So if thinking is distorted, if you'll accept my premise just for a second, that thinking is distorted in those cases of prejudice and bigotry, what feelings might be distorted? And I wonder if you can put that in the chat box. If somebody who's prejudiced, it's not just what they think, it's what they feel. What feelings are distorted or excessive or destructive or not tempered? Any ideas? Okay, a sense of equality, ego and pride. Yes, the ego and the pride are distorted. And by the way, take a look at a book. I was watching one of the cable news programs, and they they referenced a book called White Rage. White Rage. I forget the author, but I just got it on Kindle. I haven't had a chance to really read it yet. But I know that what's talked about in that book is this sense of my ego feels threatened by other groups. My sense of who I am, my sense of superiority to other people is threatened by these other groups and by the way they're making their way in society and maybe prospering more than others. So yes, ego, pride, fear. Absolutely. Let's go back to Pharaoh. Remember why Pharaoh enslaved the Jewish people and was willing to kill all the male Israelites. He was afraid. And have we not seen that fear in this country with this, I don't know, conflagration of unleashing of hatred and prejudice over the past several years? Remember what they said in Charlottesville: Jews will not replace us. I fear I am being replaced. And by the way, they said that in reference to immigrants from Mexico. Jews, you are using your power, another distortion, by the way, a cognitive distortion that Rabbi Heschel talked about. You're using your power, Jews, to bring in immigrants so that they will take our jobs. Jews, you will not replace us. That's what they said, that's what they meant, and it was fear that was driving that. Fear is huge with prejudice. Fear, ego, pride, a lack of love, a lack of care for your fellow human being. Absolutely. Where's the love? Look at Nazi Germany, and some of those people were brilliant. They had PhDs. They were brilliant, but they lacked empathy, compassion, love, kindness, any of those things. It's amazing how well educated, not Hitler, but the other leaders of the Nazi Party were. Amazing how well educated they were. PhDs, doctors, but had a distorted sense of emotion. Yeah, Carol Anderson is the author of White Rage, and I recommend that to you. Yeah. So I think Rabbi Heschel was onto something there. There's a maximum of hatred and cruelty. There is a minimum of reason and thinking, and we could add love, empathy, an over exaggeration of fear, ego, pride, all these things that we talked about. And so the civil rights movement still has a lot of work ahead. We have a lot of work ahead in this country in trying to be Moses to those who would be Pharaoh. And I think it's up to all of us to have a little bit of that Moses, a little bit of that compassion, that empathy, that insight, that leadership, that integrity, that humility, that kindness. It's up to each one of us to help heal this country and continue to help in the civil rights movement and in other areas of society that are in need of healing and transformation. I want to thank you all for the conversation. We went a little bit long tonight, but this is pretty heavy stuff. This is pretty profound stuff. So you've got the link in the chat box if you want to download the PDF and look further. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rabbi, for sharing those wonderful words of Torah. So I want to conclude that section and what Rabbi just said with a song that's very relevant. It was written by Debbie Friedman, Zichrono Livracha, and it's called In Ein Ani Li, and it also has the words Bechol Dor Vador. So we'll put the words up on the screen for you. You'll see in the translation, you'll see at the top, first of all, the text come from Pirkei Avot and from Pesachim. So the translations, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? In every generation, a person must see themselves as if they had personally gone forth from Egypt. So I'll share this song with you. If you do know it, then feel free to sing along. אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, אימתי, אימתי. אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, אימתי, אימתי. בכל דור ודור חיי אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, אימתי, אימתי. אם אין אני לי מי לי, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני, ואם לא עכשיו, אימתי, אימתי.
Thank you, Cantor. Thank you so much. Well, let's spend a few moments now in the peace of Shabbat, the wholeness of Shabbat, and the transformational message of the Torah and of Judaism. And let's spend a few moments in our own personal silent prayer and contemplation.
Hopefully you've had enough time now to go through your own personal meditations and reflections. We're going to conclude that section with Shalom Rav, which you'll find on page 19 of your Siddur, and we'll put it up on the screen for you as well. It's a prayer for abundant peace. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech adon b'chol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon b'chol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. B'tov be'nachal בשלומך. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך, תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם, תשים לעולם.
Shalom Rav, literally great peace, great wholeness. The word shalom means peace and it means wholeness. Shalem means to be whole. And we pray now for the wholeness of people that we know and love who are sick or injured and who are in need of healing, a healing of body and spirit, a return to wholeness. And so we invite you to turn to page 22 as we join together in our prayer for wholeness, our prayer for healing, Misha Berach.
מי שברך אבותינו, מקור הברכה לאמותינו. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen.
Well, at this time, we invite you to offer the names of someone who's in need of healing. If you'll offer their names in the chat box, our prayer of healing is for each one of them. And our prayer of healing this Shabbat is also for the folks listed on our Misha Berach page. All of these temple members who are in need of healing, our prayer is for them. All of these family members who are in need of healing, our prayers for them. And all of these friends and co-workers who are in need of healing, our Misha Berach prayer is for them as well, as we now continue our Misha Berach prayer of healing.
מי שברך אמותינו, מקור הברכה לאבותינו. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
We pray that they are all healed. Well, our thoughts now turn to those who have departed this earth, our family members who have died, our friends who have passed away, members of our community who have passed, members of every race and nation who are a blessing to humanity. We think of them now, we honor them through our memory and through our prayer. As I mentioned the name of a loved one who has passed, I invite you to please stand, and then in just a moment, we'll all stand together to recite the Kaddish prayer. This Shabbat, our prayer is for Ernestine Erkin. It's for Sephora Porath. And it's for Joyce Wolf and Lori Greenberg and Earl Sanders, Larry Moskowitz, Rebecca Kaufman, Howard Schwartz, David Bernstein, Stephen Strauss, Donald Allen Pocock, Susan Goldsmith, Cecilia Carpenter, Alan Loiben, Patricia Jacobson, and Florence Schwartz. And for those who are observing Yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death of a loved one, tonight we remember Marguerite Meller, Lionel Michael, we remember Isaac Berman, and Janice Bente, and Moshe Marco. We remember our dear friend Peggy Nichols, and Frank Rapone, and we remember Jose E. Luna Sr., and Judith Mervis. We remember Morris Bolter. We remember Laura Richelson, Helen Stevenson, Dorothy. We remember Dorothy Simmons, and Evelyn Cantor, Rebecca Rosenthal, David Levy, Harold Leff, Billy Morham, Joseph Weissman, Diane Allen Goodman, and Sarah Poska. And we invite you now to mention the name of a loved one in the chat box who our Kaddish prayer is for tonight. It's for them as well. Thinking of all of them, we now stand together as a community of family and friends as we turn to page 24 to recite Kaddish, thanking God that they were all with us. Together we pray. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Bialma divarach hilute v'yamlich malchute. B'chaye chon uvyome chon. U'b'chaye d'chol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam ule'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach. V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal. Shemei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn. May we be a source of comfort to all who are bereaved. And together we say, amen.
Amen.
And please be seated, everybody.
We're going to take a moment now to repeat those last couple of lines. Oseh Shalom. We pray for peace. Oseh Shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
We are now honored to call upon Temple Sinai board member and Lador Vador chairwoman, Louise Spillman. Hi, Louise. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you so much for your inspiring words, especially about Martin Luther King. You know, we used to celebrate it always on the 15th of January today. And the 15th of January is a very special day for me because it's the anniversary. It's my anniversary of my marriage with Jack. And Jack, of course, is no longer here, but we still celebrate. I still celebrate. And it's been, so that was lovely to hear what you had to say about Martin Luther King and his connection with Judaism. Also, I wanted to thank Cantor for your beautiful singing, and your beautiful music inspires and soothes all of us. We'd also like to thank tonight's service participants, Susan and Philip Hain for candle lighting, who do at least 50% at the temple, according to the rabbi. Mazel Tov on your Israel anniversary. Dora Fine for your leading the Via Haftarah prayer, so beautifully read. Tonight's virtual Oneg is sponsored by Ruth and Richard Goldstein in memory of Peggy Nichols and Linda Luna and Leonard Cash in memory of Linda's father, Jose E. Luna Sr. And also want to thank Maggie and Tina for reading. You read very beautifully. And also, I'm going to thank Jason. Jason Marks does so much behind the scenes to bring us all these beautiful services and meetings and everything that goes on in the temple. And he's the one that's behind the scenes, and he does so much beautiful work. Thank you very much, Jason. Coming up at Temple Sinai this week, we have Minyan and Torah study tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Sisterhood's Hooked on Cookbooks on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Rabbi's Spiritual Nourishment class on Tuesday at 7 p.m. and Jewish meditation next Friday at 6:20 p.m. Also, please sign up for two important community-wide programs: the 21st Day Racial Equity and Social Justice Challenge, beginning this Monday on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the Jewish Federation's 25-hour Holocaust Remembrance program, which is happening next weekend, and you'll find full details and Zoom links for all events in Sunday's Temple email blast. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. And thank you, Louise. Thank you so much for your thoughtful, kind words to everyone. And yeah, Cantor, we probably need to make Jason an honorary clergy member at some point. Thanks to everybody for being here tonight. So here's what we're going to do in the next few remaining minutes, at least of the few remaining minutes of our service. We're going to do Kiddush. We're then going to share with you a very special photograph that's related to tonight and to this weekend. So Kiddush, photograph, and then a very special closing song that Cantor's going to tell you about. And then we have our virtual Oneg. So let's begin with Kiddush.
Yes, and everyone, if you can grab your Kiddush cup, we'll make a quick Kiddush together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. L'chaim.
Chaim. All right, Jason, speaking of our honorary clergy, Jason, if you will please put that picture up for everybody to see. All right, hopefully y'all can see that. You certainly recognize Reverend Dr. King right there in the middle. To his right, two gentlemen to his right with the great hair and the goatee, that's Abraham Joshua Heschel. Now take a look, Jason, put your cursor all the way to the left. I would like somebody to put in the chat box, who is that young man next to the nun? Does anybody recognize that young man?
John Lewis?
Yes, that is Congressman John Lewis of blessed memory right there. So now we can zoom back out, Jason. So we've got future Congressman Lewis, we've got Reverend Dr. King, we've got Abraham Joshua Heschel with many other dignitaries. This takes place, this picture was taken March 21st, 1965. The march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And there is Dr. King and Dr. Heschel right next to each other. They became friends after that conference that we shared Rabbi Heschel's wise words about, that first conference in Chicago. They became friends. So this is about 2 years after that. Rabbi Heschel said of this day, for many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest. It was about prayer. Legs are not lips, he said, and walking is not kneeling. And yet our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. Dr. Heschel then went on to say, famously, I felt that my legs were praying.
Our closing song for tonight is very relevant to that picture that was just shared. And it's even the graphic for the words we're going to share with you even have a similar picture on there in light of Rabbi Heschel's close relationship with Martin Luther King Jr. So this song is "We Shall Overcome," which I'm sure many of you know, and it's a very symbolic song, kind of an anthem for these types of protests, for justice, for civil rights. So please join me. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Thank you so much, Cantor. Thank you for the beautiful music and the special music for this very special weekend. And thanks to everybody for being here. We'd love to have you unmute yourselves. We'll wish each other a Shabbat Shalom, and then we'll enjoy our own egg together.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Happy anniversary,
Shabbat
Louise.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We even see Jason.
Shalom.